Sometimes people do discover films, and those films do stand the test of time. I think The Abyss holds up in every way. We did so much in the way of practical effects, and even our visual effects when we were underwater all really stand up very well.
The Abyss is a perfect stepping stone in the career of Jim Cameron. It combined two of his passions, science fiction and the oceans.
You know, Jim, everyone has different descriptions of Jim, but to me, he's this very rare combination of like big vision, big ideas, and then completely fluent in details.
It's a real scope frame because you got the other divers in the background.
And when The Abyss came along, it broke ground in just about every aspect of filmmaking, and I think he really kind of embraced the technology at that point and realized, you know, it is possible to do just about anything if you've got the determination.
A vision, a creative vision, is what drove the need for innovation. And that's usually how it always works. Someone has an idea, and we have to be able to do it.
We were just making things up as we went along. It was all new territory, and that was a huge part of the fun. It was the Wild West.
The main word I would say is intense.
39%. Cut! That's a cut, damn it!
Jim's an expert at anticipating a problem and figuring out a way to avoid it happening. However, stuff just happens, right?
There's a lot of myth and lore that's inaccurate about the legacy of The Abyss.
Yeah, I'm okay.
Yes, it was a difficult shoot. There's no question. Were tensions constant? Yes. However, we managed to make an amazing film, even though the one person who had it hardest was Jim.
That wasn't record, but it was close. How long were you down for? How long did it take to decompress? It was 15 minutes of decompression, and total of 5 hours and 15 minutes, something like that.
Well, I definitely wrote something very ambitious for its day. I think ambitious for any time. You know, there were some fairly complicated diving sequences and so on.
Jim knows this from the get-go. Once the script is done, he's already identified what the challenges are. Where do we film it? How do we film it? How do we make it safe? So all of those were on the drawing board from the very, very beginning.
Making a whole movie underwater is very difficult to do at best.
Both the live action and visual effects were shot underwater, and no one had filmed the movie this way.
The Abyss was huge. Life-size sets, real submarines, you know, with 15 to 20 crew members in the water all the time. Actors, their wardrobe was commercial dive gear. You know, it's nothing like it.
So I went to the guy that shot The Deep, which was Al Giddings. He had built his own camera housings, he had his own underwater lights, you know, he had created his own kit. But when Al came on The Abyss, his eyes were like a deer in the headlights. It's like, oh my God, how are we gonna do this?
There'll be 2 safety divers on each guy, plus I'll be in the water, sort of back and forth, checking ears and so on. And we'll go to the bottom, check out the helmet, the mask, push the purge thing, and just a little time on the gear to get you used to it. 12 feet just to try this thing.
Somehow or other, they found this nuclear power plant in Gaffney, South Carolina. It was abandoned in mid-construction out in the middle of nowhere. Jim went down there and noticed this enormous cylindrical structure off in the distance. So he goes over, they climbed up this construction crane. They looked down, and this nuclear reactor containment building, and it was 200 feet in diameter and 55 feet deep. You know, I think it just clicked into Jim that this is my tank.
It sounded insane. You'd see photos of this thing, and it was just, you know, partially completed containment vessel for a nuclear core that was never installed, contrary to myths that I've read since then. It wouldn't have held water in that condition, much less, you know, be someplace where you could film. We built the set essentially knowing that it was already going to be in the water, and that was a daily battle. People in the art department were still painting the rig at the time that the water was filling in the tank.
And the sets, when they were built, had to be able to hold 1 atmosphere of pressure. In other words, 30 pounds PSI. because they were submerged up to 30 feet deep in that big tank in South Carolina, and they would implode if they were normal set. So it had to be built like a real submarine. So it was pushing the envelope into what we had been doing in years past.
We had chlorine problems, pH problems, water leakage problems, and a large part of what we learned on the Abyss translated directly to when we built the filming tanks in the studio for Titanic, and even a bit to Avatar, how to work in water, we knew what the problems were going to be.
Standard question, but what's the biggest challenge so far in shooting?
Living, surviving the next couple weeks. Now the dive shooting is really exhausting. It's got to be the biggest sort of physical and mental challenge I've ever had, because I've got to do all my normal stuff, and then I've got to do it underwater, you know, in a medium 800 times denser than air.
Ready. Have a good trip. Yeah. Hey, look.
Jim, being the director that he is, was underwater with the actors. He was in the tank longer than anybody else.
They had a great deal of underwater, and we were going to do dialogue with actors underwater. That had never been done. I mean, nobody had a clue how to do that. And I said, well, we're going to put them in helmets. We'll build helmets, and we'll figure out what we want them to look like so we could photograph them inside, and, you know, we'll train them. We'll train them to dive.
First, he wanted to be able to see the actors' faces. So much is communicated in an actor's performance through their face, not just through their eyes. And traditional commercial dive helmets, you would really only see this much. That wasn't enough. So we had an entire vetting process. We had to make sure that the helmet design worked, that it was truly safe.
You all right? Air's on.
Hey, just wait till we get air up on you. You want to do a mic check? That'll do. Okay, very good. All right. There you go, boss.
Obviously, Jim was going to be in the water, the crew's in the water, and so how are you going to communicate? We built an underwater PA system. The trick with that is that Jim was able to talk to all of us, but we had to use hand signals to communicate back to him. It was kind of like a game of charades at first, but pretty quickly we had it figured out.
And from that point on, Jim needed a way to devise a system where the actors' voices could be recorded inside the helmets.
Here we go. Let's roll cameras. Mark it. And action. You got all that? Meet me at the moon pool. Make it fast. That's a cut. That's a cut. That's a cut. That was a good one. We'll print that. That looked good, guys. That looked really good. It was worth waiting for.
Audio is one thing, but then you've got something electrical that needs to be safe underwater so that people aren't electrocuted. So we not only had to deal with the thunder and lightning storms that could electrocute us from the crane, but also making sure that all of the lighting underwater and the cables would not electrocute us.
If you think about lighting, I mean, you had technologies where you had to bring motion picture lights down into the water and not kill anyone with electric volts. You know, it was a lot of power down there.
Almost everything prior to the Abyss shot in natural existing light. Well, we're shooting at depth. We're shooting in a dark environment.
The Abyss, we had the first underwater HMI lights. Pete Romano and Rich Mula developed these beautiful HMI lights. I don't think Jim could have lit that set without those.
Those had to be certified. They had to be safe to use underwater.
Looked okay. I couldn't believe it. I mean, I couldn't, I got into the place, you know, I don't know what, just
found the place.
That move and stopped, and then people
It's like when you're getting a massage and they find that spot that's just right.
Yeah.
That's how positioning the camera is underwater.
Jim's brother Mike built the diver propulsion vehicles, and they were constructed differently than any that previously existed. The idea was Jim could use those for like an underwater dolly shot.
You had a battery and you had two thrusters out here, and you put your arms through these loops and you could rotate those thrusters so that you could dive and you could come up and you could split them and roll.
I think the Abyss pushed all the departments. The whole industry had to rejigger to be able to make this movie.
Hey, you guys are milking that job.
Yeah, it's just because we love freezing our butts off out here for you so much.
Almost done with the shut-off valve.
So we had the remotely operated vehicles, and they were a relatively new technology at the time of the Abyss. They'd only been around for a few years.
Roll cameras.
And those were driven remotely with joysticks.
And drop the ROV vids.
And then we had the submersibles, one of which was actually just a very large ROV with a sphere put on the front of it that could be driven remotely. Kimberly looks like she's driving it, but in reality, it's being driven from off camera.
Just hover, then I'll say action, and you
go.
Roger.
I'll talk you through it.
There was a whole sequence where we needed to have miniatures, and we worked with a gentleman by the name of Walt Conti. You know, he's got double engineer in electrical and I think mechanical engineering from Stanford. His eyes lit up at the challenge, and he didn't tell you all of the problems that needed to be overcome or how impossible it was. It was literally, I think I can do this. I'm so excited to give it a try.
Jim is brilliant at mixing different techniques. So in the model world, there are two submersibles, flatbed and cab. So he asked us to build these real operating quarter-scale models that were really intended for a specific big chase sequence where the good guy, bad guys are banging into each other and tumble down the abyss eventually.
The abyss was a steep learning curve for working underwater with both optics, electronics, and a lot of the technology that we developed on the control side for the abyss, we ended up using for years and years.
Right. What's the door frame? Watch it. See it. I got it.
So then on the Titanic, he put a camera on the ROV and used it as a camera. Fast forward his documentaries, now he and his brothers created this ROV that's spooling fiber optic cable. He said, I want to go inside the Titanic. And now he has a tool that no one has. The Navy bought the technology from him.
I don't know of any other director really that could have brought that world to life as much as Jim did. The logistics and application of technologies and developing new technologies was unbelievable.
Cutting you loose, bud.
Okay, One Night, stay clear. We're setting her down. Touchdown!
As difficult as all of the filming was on the Abyss, there was a separate unit that did the surface miniatures that was even more difficult.
Effort, Al Matador, WYZ 4261. Yeah, now Bob, what's going on?
What I discovered, if you want to shoot a hurricane, you have to go film in a hurricane. We shot in a gale, so some of that storm footage, I actually was out with a real ship and a crew and a tugboat.
The surface craft that was created was so large, it actually had to get a Coast Guard license number, even though it was a quote-unquote miniature.
For the ship, we were using a miniature that was 1/10 of full size. And in that case, we had to make sure that the water was made as small as possible.
Water doesn't scale very well. It's that surface interface. It's the viscosity of water that can't be scaled down.
One approach that we used was to use very large fans to blow the water down so hard it atomized it, so it made it into smaller pieces. So we're fighting that constantly. And the other thing we used was a wetting agent, so it didn't bead up, just would sheet off.
Al Matador, you should start your smokers now.
On top of that, we had fog machines to create a cloud pattern. It's basically the stormy sky. A key sequence in the film is when the storm is raging and the heave compensator breaks away. And then the crane that was supporting all of this equipment gets pulled down into the ocean and eventually causes the deep core to slide right up to the edge of the abyss. So it was kind of a key moment in the film. It was not practical to shoot this sort of thing in any other way except as miniatures. The full-sized was out of the question. Some things just didn't exist. And doing them digitally would have been impossible, in my opinion.
We only had an opportunity to do one take. That meant that all these things that had to work in that shot, which included the complicated mechanical of bending and twisting this crane and pull it down in a realistic way, but we had a gigantic wave gag that had to time with the movements of the camera. So from that standpoint, we had never been in that position quite that extreme.
I wanted to push my characters to the extremity, in terms of psychology.
That's your technology, but why are you doing this?
Ed Harris's character confronts the violence of the human race, where the aliens, the NTIs, show him their impression of humanity. And it's pretty grim.
How do you know?
We wanted to make a film where they weren't frightening, where they were relatable, they weren't the villains, they weren't invading the earth and trying to destroy humanity. They were trying to help us and teach a lesson, essentially. So the design of the NTIs was very important. We wanted them to have an ethereal nature. We wanted them to control water. And how do you create something that you can see underwater? So they also had to be lit in a certain way.
The NTIs were made out of silicone, and they had fiber optics that came out. And then on the wings, he essentially had two rods that came out to the surface. And we used the old plexiglass splash tank, which was about maybe 8 feet tall, maybe 10 foot square. And we filled that full of water and placed the NTI puppet inside of there. On one end of this long 20-foot I-beam was the puppet, which had just basically a single rod connected to its thorax, and the wings were left free, sitting in a tank of water. And at the far end was the camera. So as you moved the two together, the camera stayed fixed relative to the puppet, but the wings then seemed to move graciously underwater.
Why didn't you?
We wanted them to have an iridescent feel. So the prosthetic effects had to work simultaneously with the creation by ILM of the CGI pseudopod.
It's a mystical technology. I think it's Clarke's second law is that any sufficiently advanced technology is indistinguishable from magic. So we wanted something magical, right? I think it's certainly the best scene in the film from a technical standpoint, because it was so cutting edge. Nobody had ever really done anything like it before.
Bud?
Jim came to us with the idea of this creature that was made out of water, and it's translucent because it's water, and it's maybe 100 feet long at times, and its shape can change to that of whatever it wants. But he couldn't figure out how to do it.
The best digital animation looked plastic, and I think ILM had to buy a lot of computer equipment just to be able to do the shot.
We knew that creating the first soft surface CGI character was going to be a difficult situation. So that was before we started shooting. We had to know that we could make that effect work. And at the end of the day, an amazing team at ILM, led by Dennis Muren, came to us and said, "We think we can do this."
Jim was hesitant about talking to a big company like us because he's a very much hands-on person and thought he would lose control. But we're ready for something really big, and that was the perfect project. Then we got a call saying he can come the next day. He was flying back to LA, would stop by the Bay Area, and we knew like about 2 in the afternoon or 3 or so that he was coming, and we're going to be there the next morning. So Jay Riddle, who was one of the guys working with us in CG, and I got together and proposed, let's see if we can do something really fast, and we could put this thing together really quick as an idea, sort of what we used to call a quick shade, but we could model it, animate it, and he would get a chance to see the motion on it, which he really had never seen anybody do before. And Jay stayed up all night, turned it around. Next morning, Jim came and looked at it and said, "Boy, you guys really want this job, and it looks really good."
Here we go. We are rolling. Action.
We would block the shots with Jon and a couple others, kind of dragging this dryer hose through the shots so everyone kind of knew, oh, that's where it's meant to be, and that's where it is when Jim says, and now it's doing this. They all had an eye line for it.
It's essentially like you're looking at an Arrowhead water bottle. I mean, just that's really what it is with motion. And computers are perfect for being able to manipulate an image in a simple way. A water bottle, I put it up and sort of looked at it. And if you look at a cylinder of water, you look through it, the image on the other side is inverted, upside down. Well, we tried that, and it just looked weird. It was real, but for some reason, it didn't look right. So we just cheated that and made it right side up. And you never notice it in the film. One of the things that Jim does that's just amazing is to continually top himself within a sequence.
Oh, wait, it's okay.
It's never quite over with. The pseudopod comes out, right? Comes into the room and they look at it. You'd think that'd be enough for most directors, but no, that turns into a face and then turns into the other person's face. And then she goes up and she touches it. And that's like shocking enough to touch this weird thing. Then she tastes it, which is very strange.
Seawater.
They took the actors, Ed Harris and Mary Elizabeth Astantonio, And they did laser scans on them, which is a common technique now, but they did a multiple series of scans on their faces. And then what they used was a technique that had started to be used in computer graphics at the time, which was morphing.
The morphing program that was originally written by Doug Smythe for warping 2D images was developed on Willow. And the big difference for us on The Abyss was to warp 3D data in the same way. So the approach that we took is I asked if Jim could direct the actors, both Mary Elizabeth and Ed Harris, to shooting them relatively full frame and have them go through the performance that he wanted to see on the pseudopod.
So they used these scans of the actors in different poses that kind of moved from one to the other and created a sense of animation in the face.
The whole sequence is only something like 25 shots, but I think we worked on it for about 7 months. So that included the software development to write all these tools that could manipulate the data.
Now we take for granted that these effects are easy to do, that you even have the computing power to do them. Back then, there wasn't a lot of computing power. It took forever, and you had to create the software. You had to have the computers who could handle it.
John Knoll and others at ILM needed to develop the software to do the effects in The Abyss. And they started working on something called Photoshop. And Photoshop, that has become so ubiquitous today, came out of Jim pushing things for The Abyss. And if you look today on the credits of Photoshop, you will still see John Knoll's name there.
I think the pseudopod sequence holds up today just as though it was done today. It seems real. It seems like it's right there.
You had to trust that Dennis and the ILM team could make the magic real, because otherwise there was no sequence. There's no question that collaborating with ILM and trusting them to create the CGI effects for that film enabled us to have complete confidence that they'd be able to do the same and much, much more for Terminator 2 Judgment Day.
I think the reason that The Abyss endures to the extent that it does today is that so much of it was done for real. And so many things that had been done on it that had never been done before.
Test, 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 1, 2, 3, 4. First recorded dialogue, underwater, on film, for a theatrical motion picture in the history of the world.
The effects industry at large were in awe, really, of what everyone had accomplished in all the different departments from the different houses, because it pushed the technology so much further than we had gone before.
What The Abyss gave Jim was a vision of what the needs were for underwater filming and underwater storytelling. He wants people to relate to the oceans, and he wants his path of exploration to inspire other people to explore, to wonder, be curious.
He's learned through all his projects about deep sea equipment, exploration, and ultimately kind of leapfrogged that whole world.
Jim's experience of working in the water and the respect he gained influenced how he did Titanic. I think he knew how challenging it was and how you can't control water.
Perfectionists will get caught up in minutia, but if something's not working, Jim will figure out a way to get what he wants, and he does get what he wants.
The Abyss is proof positive that Jim Cameron is one of the most visionary directors in the history of cinema, and that given all the technology that needs to be invented to bring those stories to life, at the end of the day, the story that he's telling is always a human and emotional one revolving around the characters.
If you want your brain, your intelligence, and every bit of experience you bring to bear to be tested every single day, then do a movie like The Abyss. And at the end of it, you're going to feel a very, very intense sense of accomplishment.
I saw these things. I touched one of them, and it wasn't some clunky steel can like we would build. It glided. It was the most beautiful thing I've ever seen.